Hi everyone, it's Erin from the Provincial Farmhouse. Today I'm going to be creating a French Country floral vase. I'm going to be working on this little vase or urn that I thrifted, and I'm going to begin by using Paint Couture's 2-in-1 primer in white. I'm going to apply one coat over the entire outside, let it dry for about 30 minutes, and then come in with the second coat and give that a couple of hours to dry. So this surface, as you can see, is pretty slick, and I want to make sure that my paint is going to stick well and stay there. I'm also going to paint a little bit on the inside part of the vase. When that was dry, I took out Paint Couture's Buttercream chalk paint. I'm going to apply 3 coats of this. The urn or the vase that I am working on, as you could see before, was already quite a dark color. So even though I do have my primer down, and given that it is white, it is going to save me some coats of paint, but I am dealing with really light colored paint here. And as you know, often that can take more coats to get the coverage that you want. So I did end up doing 3 even coats on the outside of this. I wasn't 100% sure where I was going with this in terms of color just yet, but I always like to put down a neutral base to get started. I let that dry completely, and then I took out IOD's new Chanticleer mold, and I'm going to be dusting one of the roosters with some cornstarch. This is going to help my air dry clay to release. I'm working with Dust air dry clay today, and I am pressing that clay into the Chanticleer mold. So this mold is a lot thicker than a lot of the other molds on the market, so you are going to get more of a 3D effect. You can see I'm just pushing out that excess clay with my thumb. I'm then going to press it down to compress it a little bit. Then I'm going to flex the mold, and then I'm going to gently pull my casting out. I did have a little bit of an imperfection on his wing, but that's fine. I can use a wet wipe to make that a little bit less obvious. And I don't want the bottom section to stick out quite as much, so I'm actually going to go in and cut a little bit of the clay off the back so that it sits a little bit more flush on the base of the vase that we're working with today. Once I'm happy with that, I'm going to set that to one side, and I took out Redesign's Blooming Banners mold, and I'm going to be dusting that with cornstarch, and I'm working my Dust air dry clay in. Just like with the other design, I'm pushing that excess clay out with my fingers. This is obviously quite a bit more shallow, and then once I'm happy with that, I'm going to flex the mold, and this time I'm actually going to flip it over and roll my mold back to release my casting. I'm then going to set that to the side, and then I took out IOD's Felicite mold. This is another one of the thicker mold designs, and I am working my clay into a lot of the smaller floral designs. I'm going to be making it look like our lovely rooster is sitting amongst some beautiful flowers. So I'm going to be casting a bunch of the smaller florals from this one. And I also really like this little rose design here. It's got the 2 rose buds. I'm going to be casting 2 of those. I'm going to be having them go either side of the rooster, sort of framing him out a little bit. I then added some of my Sealy's Quickset wood glue to the back of my rooster casting. I'm making sure that I have a decent amount on that so that it will stick well to my vase. So I'm going to position that little rooster, and I'm going to have him situated a little bit closer to the bottom, and then I'm going to start adding the Blooming Banners mold and also some of the little florals. So I'm sort of layering those over the top and next to our rooster. So I'm adding glue to the back of the Blooming Banners mold, and that's going to sit up the top. Again, you can see some cracks, but I'm just going to embrace that. I want this to have a vintage look, so I'm just going to play around with that until I'm happy with how that is situated. And then I'm going to use a wet wipe to soften some of the imperfections, and I'm going to continue gluing all those florals down. I wanted to add some more of the florals from the Felicite mold, so I'm going to dust a couple of the single floral designs there that have the larger, might be a peony flower, I think, perhaps, with some smaller little almost daisy-like flowers. I'm going to cast one of each of those, and I'm going to put them on either side of the rooster. So I was definitely thinking about balance, casting several of the same design and then spacing them out so that each side looked balanced and even. So I'm just going to glue those down. And again, just adjusting it a little bit so that it does look even on both sides. And then I went in and casted a couple of these other flowers here. They do look a little bit like daisies as well. And I ended up casting quite a few of this smaller flower cluster because I want to continue the design around the back of the vase, and I really like these. I think they're subtle, but it will, as I said previous, it'll give us more of a balanced design. I don't want to just sort of stop all the flowers at the front. So you can see that I am gluing them down as I'm casting them. Once I had all of those smaller florals glued down, I took out my little stamp set that I got from Amazon, and I'm going to spell out the word jardin, which means garden. I really love to use these to make impressions in my clay, so that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to spell out the word jardin on the blooming banners mold. This is something that I have done before, and it's definitely one of my favorite things to do, to subtly add in a little bit of text. And I thought it goes perfectly. Maybe we're looking at our little rooster sitting in a beautiful flower garden. So I am making impressions with my stamps, but if you didn't want to do this, you could definitely use them in the more traditional way. You would just wait until your clay is dry before you apply them. I then took out IOD's primitive mold. I'm going to be dusting the beautiful delicate trim design from that mold with cornstarch. I'm then rolling up some clay and working that into this design. So I'm just sort of pressing my thumb along that that design there to push out that excess clay, and then I'm flipping it over and rolling my mold back. So I'm using this as a trim piece around the top section. So here I'm just working out exactly how it's going to sit, and then once I have that measured off, I'm going to trim off the excess with my palette knife. I am then going to be adding some of my Sealy's Quickset wood glue to the back of that, spreading that out, and then I'm going to be gluing that around the top section of the vase there. I also then decided that I would cast another 1.5 of these because I'm also going to be adding the trim piece around a little bit lower, just underneath the handles. I really liked how this looked, how it separated the top section from the bottom. It added a little bit more interest as well. And so I had to cast another piece to finish off that design to have it going around the back, and then I glued it in place. Once I finished gluing my castings down, I did allow these to dry overnight, and then the next day I came back in with that buttercream chalk paint, and I'm going to go over the top of all of my castings so that they are all the same color as the base, because I'll be focusing a lot of the colors that I'm going to be using on the top sections of the molds, and I find it just looks a little bit tidier if I have my castings the same color as the base, and then I come in and add the details a bit later. So I only ended up doing one coat of this, and then when that was dry, I took out Paint Couture's Crackle Step 1, and I'm going to be going in all of that negative or empty space around the castings with this Crackle Step 1. I am just brushing it on. You can dab it and stipple it on. I am going for smaller cracks, so I am just brushing it on. If you want the cracks to be a bit bigger, you'll want to go in a lot heavier. So I'm going to add it to the base, then I'm also going to be adding it up around the top, and I do want a vintage look here. If you don't want that, you could definitely leave this step out. So I gave Crackle Step 1 about 30 minutes to dry, then I came in with Crackle Step 2, and I'm applying it in the same places that I put Crackle Step 1. So Crackle Step 1 will feel sticky and tacky to the touch, and it will stay that way if you don't put Step 2 on there. So definitely a good idea to keep an eye on where you've put that Step 1. I let that dry for several hours, and then I came in with Paint Couture's Van Dyke Brown Antiquing Glaze. I'm going to begin by focusing on the Chanticleer casting and obviously the florals. I'm really working this into the low points, and I'm also using my water mister to help move that glaze, and it also softens and lightens the look of it as well when you add water, because I don't want this to be super grungy, but I do like the definition that adding the glaze as a base brings. So I'm then coming in with a wet wipe and I'm wiping back a fair amount of that glaze, but I do want it to sit down in those low points. I'm not too worried just at this moment with how it's looking in the cracks that we created with the Crackle medium, but I will go back a little bit later, you'll see, after I've added it to the molds, and I will spread that glaze medium around on the sections where we have the crackle. Once I finished adding it to the base and spreading that glaze over some of the crackle, I then moved on to the top section. I do have the impressions that I made with the stamp here, so I am being careful not to wipe back too much of that glaze. I want to be able to see it sitting down in the stamp impressions. And obviously, if you don't like that grungy look, as I said before, if you don't like a vintage look, you could definitely leave this step out. When that was dry, I took out Paint Couture's Basil chalk paint. I'm going to be using a small artist brush to go in and start adding it to all of the leaf details. There's not a huge amount of leaf details on all of these castings. Majority of them are up on this top blooming banners mold. I am going to be going back in with a wet wipe to pull back some of that. I do want a vintage look, so I don't want it to have perfect coverage. I'll pull back some of that. And I can also remove it from any areas that I get it that I don't want it. And then I'm going to take out Paint Couture's Vera at the Ballet mineral paint. I'm actually going to be applying this with a makeup sponge. I don't want it to go down into the crevices that we've added the glaze to. I want the color to sit on the top so that the glaze gives the castings more definition. So I'm going to move on down to the bottom section of the vase there, adding some more of the green, and then repeating the same process with the Vera at the Ballet on the florals that look a little bit more like they're roses or peonies. On the smaller florals, I decided to add Paint Couture's Duck Egg chalk paint. I am going to be using that makeup sponge and offloading a lot of the excess there, and then just going over the top of all of those smaller florals. I really love this blue tone. It's still in keeping with the more vintage pastel palette that I am going for today. So I'm going to continue to work my way around my vase there, adding that beautiful duck egg to the smaller florals. For the center of the blue flowers, I'm going to be using Paint Couture's Spanish Sunrise Mineral Paint. I'm applying that to the center of the flowers with just a small artist brush. I don't need full coverage here. I am going to be pulling a little bit of that back, but I do want to bring a little bit of definition to those flowers, and again, bring in a little bit of that pastel tone. When that was dry, I took out Paint Couture's Purely White Mineral Paint. I'm going to be using the same makeup sponge, and I am dabbing off some of the excess, and I'm just going to add that over the top of that larger flower that we added that could be a daisy. I'm not exactly sure what it is, so I'm just adding that to that one. I only ended up adding 2 of those on the design, as you can see. And then I decided that I would go in and add some lighter tones over the top of our Chanticleer rooster. I want to lighten him up a little bit while still allowing that glaze to give him some definition. And then once I finished adding it to the rooster, I then went in and decided that I would start adding it to the top trim. Again, allowing that glaze to stay there. I don't want to cover it, but I do want to bring in a little bit more of that lighter tone. So I'm going to add it to both of my trim pieces. When that was dry, I got some more of that purely white mineral paint on my brush. I've offloaded a lot of the excess, and then I'm going to go in and do some light dry brushing over the top of the florals. This is going to catch those high points. It's going to create a little bit of a tonal difference over the top of those, some lighter tones. It definitely softens the look as well. It helps blend the colors together a little bit. I'm going over the top of the top section as well. This is definitely a technique that I like to do to soften my projects. I then went in and decided I'd add a little bit more of my glaze over the top of the rooster. However, this is just the same brush I was using before. I don't have any extra glaze on there, and then you can see I'm wiping a little bit of it back. I also went a little bit over the top of the trim as well, just to catch some of those details in the areas where I'd maybe gone a little bit heavy with the purely white. And a little bit on the florals as well here and there. So this was definitely a project where I was stopping a lot and going in and adding some extra colors here and there, just keeping an eye on the different tones and adding in a lot of layers until it looked the way that I wanted. So I'm adding a little bit more to the top section. I wanted that to be a bit dark to show a little bit more of the crackle. And then when that was dry, I took out Paint Couture's Bronze Lux Metallic. I'm going to focus that on the handles of the vase or the urn, and I'm going over the top of that and also on the underside of those as well. I ended up doing 2 coats of this on each of the handles. I just wanted to bring in another color, and I do love the Lux Metallics by Paint Couture. I just think that it really just gives it that something special when I can add that. So I'm going to add that to the other handle, and then I'm also going to be adding it to the top rim of the urn as well. Now, obviously, if this isn't to your taste, you could leave this step out. I then moved on and used the edge of the brush I was using with the bronze. I'm adding that to the edges of the blooming banners mold just to make this stand out a bit more and to tie it in with the other bronze sections. And then I started adding some bronze to our little rooster's beak. And then I'm also going to add that to his little comb above his head there. I just wanted to bring in another color, but not something that was going to overwhelm or detract from the florals. So adding the bronze will tie in with the handles as well. And then I decided I would go in and start adding some to the little rooster's feet as well. And I'm also going to add some to his tail and wing as I go along. So I just wanted to define his features a little bit more. I felt like he was fading into the background just a little bit, so this was a good option. If you wanted, however, you could definitely go in and you could paint him more like a traditional rooster, but I didn't think the colors would go with the color palette that I'm working with. So I just stuck with the bronze for highlighting the details. To create a little bit more definition on his eye, I went in with a little bit of the Van Dyke brown glaze over the top of his eye, and then I just used my finger to pull it back from the high points, and I think that helped. I am then going in now with the bronze on the wing, like I said that I was going to before, and I also added a little bit to his feathers under his head there. And then when that was dry, I came in with a wet wipe to pull some of it back to show some of the feather details to soften that look a little bit. And I did decide to go in and add a little bit more of the Vera at the Ballet, a little bit more of the duck egg, and to also go in with a bit more of the Spanish sunrise, just to go in and define those flowers a little bit that had gotten a little bit lost underneath the white dry brushing. And here's a look at our French Country floral vase. I'm really pleased with how this turned out. I had a lot of fun combining all of those different molds and the pastel colors. Let me know what you think of today's project in the comments. If you enjoyed today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would hit that like button, comment, and share it out. If you haven't already, I would love it if you would hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any of our videos. You can find a full product list in the description below and my affiliate links. Thanks for watching.